to get to introduce our guest speaker who's going to talk to you about leading with innovation. And that is important for you because in your time in the Air Force, you're going to encounter probably more wicked problems than either he or I did. You're probably going to have to pick between the limited resources that you will never have enough of and may have fewer than what we have today. So you're going to have to find out how to do it better, smarter. The good news is he's very smart. I'm not. I'm not going to get taught how to do stuff. It's really about you as a leader getting behind the good idea, figuring out if it's worth the squeeze, and then you resourcing it. He's going to give you examples of that. I went through the Air Force journey for 26 plus years prior to getting to work with him. And I lived with a lot of buzzwords, a lot of process improvement. I got a black belt, but I never was part of an organization that really went about innovation in a way that produced tangible results. But more importantly, had from the ground floor to the top floor, people that were inspired towards their need each day. And largely had to do with a lot of the concepts he instilled in us. Some of you have heard me say, that was my third group, my seventh command. I was not really thinking I was going to work for a wing commander who was going to make me bring my best game every day by that point. But this is the person that I work for, that not only was I bringing my best game every day, I feared that my airmen may tell him more than they tell me that I'd never worked for an operator. And we'll get into the speech today. So it's my privilege today to introduce Brigadier General Dragon Teichert. Sir, what do you call you?
Awesome. Thanks, Tim, man. Thanks, Get 720, for having me. It is an absolute joy to be in front of you and to be here at Penn State, hopefully to inspire you a little bit towards creating an innovative culture wherever you are. But it's also awesome to be here with Tim Man, Colonel Happen. He was an outstanding group commander in the maintenance group at Edwards. You all are massively privileged to have an experienced leader like him leading this detachment. Think about the challenges of his group command. So he was a group commander at Joint Base Andrews. You think about the responsibility for making sure that those aircraft at America's airfield, the President's airfield, are working right. That fell under his responsibility. And then to go to Edwards, where it isn't just one or two platforms, but it is every platform essentially in the United States Air Force inventory, and highly modified versions of those aircraft. And it was him and his maintenance group that made sure every single day those planes were flying. So you have an experienced leader, 7 commands, like he said. So you all are extremely fortunate, and it's my honor to be here. So I grew up in Western Washington State, and I was a 7-year-old boy in 1980. And as I was there in Western Washington, the coolest thing for me was to track the impending eruption of Mount St. Helens, a volcano there in Western Washington State. Man, I was a young boy, and I was hoping that that thing would explode. And the experts were saying that it was going to happen soon. In fact, so much so that they evacuated a large area around Mount St. Helens and told everybody, hey, get away, this mountain's going to blow. And I was rooting for it. Everyone was going to be safe because they were evacuated. Except for one guy. Go ahead, flip the slide, by the way. So as a 7-year-old boy, one of the most vivid memories of my time growing up was hearing and seeing this thing happen. And so it was cool, right? It was powerful, it was loud. But then I thought about a character that was named Harry R. Truman, not the President Harry S. Truman, but an old codger that lived at the base of Mount St. Helens. He ran a lodge on the base of Spirit Lake, which is a lake that was there near Mount St. Helens. And I think it is true that he was the only person that did not evacuate and heed the evacuation order. In fact, he said something like this: this mountain ain't gonna hurt me. And then at 8:30 or so on May 18, 1980, in about a second, he was buried under 150 feet of volcanic debris. No one ever found him. In spite of his valiant steadfastness and stubbornness, his complacency and his failure to heed warnings caused him to be buried alive, and indeed that mountain did hurt him. So I say all of that to say this. The experts will say that if we, the United States of America and the United States military, don't do something differently, if we don't heed the threats that are out there, then we are also going to get buried by the onslaught of history. And the truth of the matter is, if you read things like the National Defense Strategy, the one from 2018, or the one that they're going to release here in the next couple of weeks or months, that it is telling us that the world is a dangerous place. And it's telling us that we need airmen and guardians and soldiers, sailors, and Marines that aren't just going to live with complacency, but they're going to live with a sense of urgency, not just to do things differently, but to make sure that we are finding innovative ways to change the things that we do to deal with the threats that are out there. So no doubt you've been tracking what's going on in Eastern Europe, but our Secretary of the Air Force says that that's not even our greatest threat. His priorities, his top three, Secretary Kendall, are China, China, and China. And in spite of what's going on in strategic competition in Eastern Europe, that's extremely important. We, young airmen and guardians, and us that have the opportunity to lead you, need to figure out how not to be complacent like Harry R. Truman, but find ways to make sure that we are evolving our force in order to meet the demands of a very contested environment with malign actors like Russia and like China and like others. So we had the privilege and the opportunity to work together at Edwards. We made it our goal to become the innovative model organization at the base or wing level in the United States Air Force. Not because we wanted to do it to pat ourselves on the back, but because we were convinced that that was what our nation needed us to do, and we had an opportunity to do it, and we did it together. And during the course of that journey, we learned, at least I learned, at least 8 things that I want to pass on to you that you can put in your toolkit as young officers to be, and you can hopefully use some of those concepts to be more prepared for the challenges you'll face, and to make sure that you mold the organization you have an opportunity to influence into the type of organization that our country needs it to be. Go ahead and flip the slide. So I'm not going to linger here. These are the big 8. I'm going to talk about each of these. They don't make any sense to you now. I hope that they do by the time I get done talking. Next slide. So that is a picture of Douglas MacArthur. Hopefully you know who he is, famous soldier. And he went back in 1962 to his alma mater at West Point, the United States Military Academy, to give what is known as his farewell speech. And this is in part what he said. "You are the leaven which binds together the entire fabric of our national system of defense," talking to those cadets. "From your ranks come the great captains who hold the nation's destiny in their hands the moment the war tocsin sounds. The long gray line has never failed us. Were you to do so, a million ghosts in olive drab and brown khaki and blue and gray would rise from their white crosses thundering those magic words, duty, honor, country." He was reminding those cadets that they were part of a long chain, the long gray line, of success in performing the mission of our nation and in the United States Army. We have our own long line. It's called the long blue line. That's a phrase that our former Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Goldfein, used, the long blue line. And our predecessors have done amazing things molding our organization to be ready for the challenges they face. We stand on their shoulders, and we are a part of their amazing legacy. And if we're going to rise to the challenges of this world that you're going to inhabit and that you're going to lead through, then we need to be very mindful of the huge responsibility we have to continue on the successes of that long blue line. Because if we don't, then we will fall short of their legacy, and it's our responsibility to create and to innovate and to give all our best in line with the core values of integrity and service and excellence to make sure that we live up to the legacy of those Americans and those airmen that have come before us. And I want you to be motivated by that thought. And so, from an innovation standpoint, the challenge is don't be like Harry R. Truman, but do be like that long gray line that McCarthy talked about to make sure that we live up to the huge challenges that you will face in a far greater way than we faced during our young officer years in the United States Air Force. So if you're part of the long gray or blue line, please live up to that standard. And number two, there was an organization that started in 1942 called the Office of Strategic Services. It was the predecessor to the CIA, and they, as a part of their job during the midst of World War II, wrote a sabotage field manual to distribute to those that were in occupied territories so that normal citizens could know how to slowly sabotage the occupying force. And they broke those instructions down into personal things that individuals could do, and then group things that organizations or those that had sway in organizations could do. There'll be a purpose to this, I promise, so stick with me. So for individuals or personal individual actions that can sabotage an organization, they say a non-cooperative attitude may involve nothing more than creating an unpleasant situation among one's fellow workers, engaging in bickerings, or displaying surliness or stupidity. Hopefully you're not thinking of fellow cadets, but if you want to sabotage an organization, be a little surly and be a little stupid, and you can chip away at the organization. Give lengthy and incomprehensible explanations when questioned, act stupid. Some of you maybe naturally are good at that. Be as irritable and quarrelsome as possible without getting yourself in trouble. Bring up irrelevant issues as frequently as possible, and then make speeches and talk as frequently as possible at great length. Illustrate your points by long anecdotes. Hopefully I'm not doing that now, and accounts of personal experiences. So that's how you sabotage a system and organization as an individual. This is in their field manual as the predecessor to the CIA. From an organizational standpoint, insist on doing everything through channels. Never permit shortcuts to be taken in order to expedite decisions. By the way, a little bit of a caveat right now. I understand there are laws and rules and regulations. What I'm about to say doesn't suggest that you should just recklessly violate laws or rules and regulations. But if they are stupid or they're hindering your organization, I'll talk more about this in a bit, then find ways to get waivers or delegate authority or ask for an exception or redress towards that law, policy, or procedure. But anyway, a way to sabotage an organization is to always ropely, blindly follow the written rule without even thinking about the commander's intent or thinking about maybe the manifestations of that. When possible, refer all matters to committees for further study and consideration. Always advocate caution. Be worried about the propriety of any decision. Raise the question of whether such action as is contemplated lies within the jurisdiction of the group, or whether it might conflict with the policy of some higher echelon. Multiply paperwork in plausible ways. And then finally, multiply the procedures and clearances involved in issuing instructions, paychecks, and so on. See that 3 people have to approve everything where 1 would do. So here's why I say all of that. First of all, sadly, in a big bureaucracy like the United States Air Force, the United States Space Force, there are things that maybe ring true and resonate from some of those ways to sabotage progress. That's sad, and we should find ways to get rid of those things that stand in our way. One of the things, though, that is striking to me is when leaders at any level don't delegate authority down to the lowest possible level. Because they probably can. It just takes a little bit of risk and a little bit of trust that those below them will do with that authority what is appropriate. And I also find that there is a lot of opportunity, certainly at a wing commander level, whether it's an 06 or an 07, to waive regulations that don't make any sense, that are standing in the way of airmen or guardians. It probably doesn't surprise you that in the Air Force there's a regulation on regulations. It's about 200 pages long. And they go through a lot of details in there, but there's some paragraphs in there about the waiver authority of someone like a wing commander that gives you a massive amount of authority to find ways not to make sure 3 people are approving things when 1 would do, but to push things down to the lowest level and to find ways to waive regulations or instructions that are getting in the way of their airmen and their families and their mission. And we found during this innovative journey of ours that if we just invite airmen to solicit or pass to us those things that are getting in their way, and what is the paragraph in the regulation that is causing them to stumble, then we will go after those things aggressively at our level to get them out of the way. We had a summer of waivers where we were literally asking airmen at any level to just send us ideas that waive things that are getting in your way. Literally, we got something like 140 of them, and we approved all but 2. That's stunning to think about how many things airmen came up with that were getting in their way that without much risk, we were able to say, got it, waived, or pushed up the chain to get waived. I actually thought that we failed in a lot of respects because we only got 2 ones that we had to say no to. We weren't getting them to be aggressive enough. Hey, we want you to be aggressive and pass things on that I'm bound to say no to, but we did get 140 or so, and we were able to approve all but 2. But certainly a way to get airmen and guardians unleashed to be able to do their jobs and take care of their workplaces and their families and their fellow airmen and guardians is to find ways to not have 3 people have to approve everything, but just the opposite. Get things waived and delegated and approved to the lowest possible level. And once you start that momentum, then you are undoubtedly going to gain their trust, and they're going to raise their hand more and more often and tell you what's getting in their way. And if you listen a little bit, then you'll be able to get rid of some things, and they will trust you with their problems and trust you with their ideas in ways that help you become an innovative organization. All right, so that's 3 people where 1 would do. Next slide, please. Herb Keller is the founder and CEO of Southwest Airlines. If you've flown Southwest, you know that it's different in so many respects from a normal airline. I've flown back from San Antonio on Monday, and they're cheaper, and they're more reliable, and to some extent, they have a more fun, enjoyable culture than the normal airline that you hop on. I fly a lot in my job in international affairs, and there is something different about them now. They don't travel much internationally, but when I'm domestic, I fly them as often as I can. And Herb Keller, is known as one of those leaders that has created an innovative, different, fun organization, one of those organizations that people want to be a part of. And in a book that's called Nuts by him, he wrote this. If we wanted to learn more about your values, we would ask to see 2 things, your checkbook and your calendar. How you spend your money and your time tells us a lot about what you value. The same is true for organizations. Employees, consciously or not, learn about an organization's values by watching how the company and its executives spend company money and use company time. So he's saying, as an individual, if I was to really figure out what your values and priorities are, I wouldn't listen to what you say. I would look at those 2 things, how you spend your money and how you spend your time, your calendar and your checkbook. And as an organization, I will similarly prove what your real core values are, what your real priorities are, by looking at how you spend your money and how you spend your time. So what does that mean for leaders? It means that if you say that you are trying to create innovation in your organization, then it means that on your schedule, you are setting aside time to innovate yourself, you're giving time to your airmen and guardians to innovate themselves, and you are actively involved in the types of processes they are using. Your team, the broad team of innovators in your organization, you are investing your very limited time in them to prove that innovation is important. That's the calendar. Now the checkbook. So I've got some level as a wing commander, or you will as a squadron commander or flight commander, or even as a first-term airman or guardian, and you will have a certain amount potentially of discretionary budget authority. And if you really say that innovation is important, then you're going to have to allocate some of that towards innovative activities that don't necessarily have an obvious way that you're going to get a return on your investment. You're going to pump some money and some resources into innovative activity with the hope and the faith that some of that will generate a return on investment, because you can't really prove it up front. The Air Force did a pretty good job of that a few years ago, where they created something called Squadron Innovation Funds, which is essentially a pot of money that they sent to wing commanders to distribute to their wing intentionally to solve problems and to innovate. But that wasn't enough. I wasn't going to give away a lot of money doing that, so I had to put up some of my own money. And it was pretty striking to me as we stood up organizations that helped us nurture a innovation culture. We called one of them the Hustle Squad, with some young civilian, military, enlisted and officer airmen, and giving them the resources to stand up a location, to have as their headquarters, and to be able to invest in education so that we could send our airmen out to education opportunities to learn how to innovate. That's not necessarily going to generate a return on investment, but it does demonstrate that you do value innovation, and you will find with small amounts of investment of time and money that your airmen will then understand those things as your priority, and they will then start to generate innovative activity because they see that you are proving your priority by your calendar and by your checkbook. By the way, when you send an airman and you give them, say, $20,000 to go to a 2-week course on innovation at Stanford, $20,000 is a lot of money, right? It might be budget dust for big bad Air Force, but it's a fairly small amount. Now, I could spend $20,000 on a good idea from an airman to create an innovative solution to solve one problem, or maybe a better use of that $20,000 is to go educate an airman or guardian so then they can come back and help you solve multiple problems. And so think through the value that's not tangible in education in how you allocate your resources so that you can create an innovative culture and solve many problems instead of maybe just solving one problem by spending money to try to solve that one problem. So that's your calendar and your checkbook. Next slide, please. Smithsonian Magazine, about 5 years ago, wrote an article that I read with interest that is entitled 10 Inventions That Inadvertently Transformed Warfare. It was looking back for the last 200 to 300 years of the, no kidding, top 10 essentially innovative things that transformed warfare in any military on the planet. And I was expecting to see, as I read through those top 10, the big flashy things, right? Space Force type items, Air Force type items, nuclear type of items, and there were some of those on there. But literally, the first two listed were the bayonet and barbed wire. Think about the impact that the Smithsonian says those two very simple, innovative things had on the course of warfare. Right? There were some other flashy things in those other top 10, but a bayonet is a nice strap to a rifle. Right? A barbed wire is a wire with some spikes on it. That's all it is. But those small, seemingly simple things of innovation revolutionized warfare as one and two of the top 10 things that have innovated or revolutionized warfare over time. So sometimes we get into the idea that in order to be innovative and to be good, we need to go for a moonshot. That's a book called Moonshot. That's not wrong to some extent, but it discounts the power of the cumulative effect of small things that you do to innovate, and those things add up pretty quickly. We, in addition to the Summer of Waivers, had this idea scale challenge, and there was this website and this online way where you plugged in your innovative idea, and then we racked and stacked the innovative ideas, and we had a cut line, and we decided to fund a certain amount. And it wasn't the case that we would look for the single idea that would spend all of our money that we allocated towards that item or this idea scale challenge and go for that. We found that the best mix and the balance of making an impact in our organization was to find the sum of little things, so now we can tackle 30 or 40 of those 160 ideas with the budget that we had, and go after those, and the cumulative effect of a bayonet and a barbed wire in innovating your organization and how you do business and how your airmen and families are cared for can have way greater of an impact as the sum of little innovations than the one expensive, flashy innovation that is called something like a moonshot. So I want to challenge you as you think about an innovative culture, the power of small innovations and encouraging those things and investing your time and the money on those things so that you can create ultimately more innovation than you ever could if you tried to go for one big thing and use all of your money on that. Next slide, if you would, please. So I'm a Dunkin' Donuts fan, not because of the donuts, because I love their coffee. I stopped and got one on the drive up today from DC. And we didn't have a lot of Dunkin' Donuts there outside of Edwards. We had one up in Tehachapi and we had one down in Lancaster. But I wanted to treat those airmen, civilian, enlisted or officer military, whose idea scale ideas did not get selected above the cut line in our idea scale challenge. And so I had an office there in the headquarters building on the 3rd floor in the center of Edwards Air Force Base. I had this awesome wraparound outside balcony. And so all of the losers, not losers as a pejorative term, but those that did not win in the idea scale challenge, I invited to spend the afternoon with me eating Dunkin' Donuts and drinking Dunkin' coffee and just chatting outside on the patio outside of my office. And we did it because innovation experts tell us that the way you treat failures is more important to create an innovative culture than the way you treat successes. Not saying that doing right by these successes and these good ideas isn't important, but airmen and guardians will really start to believe that you're serious about innovation when you reward those that try and don't quite make it. And oh, by the way, something that we found out, one, these airmen were motivated by that idea, and it created opportunities for more airmen who heard about that to be willing to raise their hand and suggest things that may or may not work because they know that we're rewarding and recognizing those that fall short. But we also realized as we talked to these airmen, that just checking them up about their idea, we found a way to get to yes in about 10 more cases by talking to them about their idea. It didn't rack and stack well in our rubric of what's above the cut line and what's not, but I talked to this airman and there was some good ideas there, and I talked to this airman and some good ideas there. They were kind of similar. And we're like, hey, we've got a little bit of extra cash. How about if we take this piece of your idea, this piece of your idea, and now we just got to yes and 2 new ideas. And that happened in about 10 individual cases. Just because we chatted up and spent some time, our calendar, and a little bit of our money, our checkbook, on finding ways to celebrate failure, in this case with Dunkin' with Dragon. And so think about how you handle those things that maybe aren't the good ideas when an airman recommends something to you. My definition for proof of an innovative culture is any airman in your organization trusting that if they raise their hand with a new way of doing things, someone's going to listen. It means that they know that we will listen and consider and apply if appropriate. To me, that is the proof of an innovative culture, and the way you treat those that fall short, maybe with ideas that are infeasible, those ideas that are a little too wacky, a little too dangerous, a little too expensive, the way you treat those that fall below the cut line will far further extend and expand your culture of innovation than how you treat those that are above the cut line. All right, next slide, please. Daring wins. This is clearly a picture of the Wright Flyer on December 17th, 1903. Let me read a quote to you from Wilbur Wright. The man who wishes to keep at the problem long enough to really learn anything positively must not take dangerous risks. Carelessness and overconfidence are usually more dangerous than deliberately accepted risks. So Wilbur Wright there talks about how carelessness and complacency are not things that we need to embrace in our culture because we will fail and we will fail hard. But he doesn't say don't take risks. He says don't take careless risks, but in some ways implies take deliberately accepted risks. And so now you're a leader in an organization, and it is up to you to weigh the risks to decide what's willing to try to move forward. There's got to be a methodology there. I'll talk more about methodology here in a bit. But I want you to know that it is one of the leader's fundamental responsibilities to weigh risk and to consider risk. And sometimes it's going to be careless if you go down the risk path, or sometimes you should, if you're going to innovate your organization and live up to what support and defend means for you, it means that you are going to have the moral courage to take deliberately accepted, carefully considered risk if you're going to move your organization forward. Otherwise, you're going to stagnate. You're not going to go anywhere, and frankly, you're not going to be earning the pay or performing the duties that we expect from you in the United States Air Force, the United States Space Force. Let me provide another quote for you. Empire of the Air is a book written by a Frenchman in 1881 that was one of the motivational writings that encouraged the Wright brothers to spend the time that they spent as bicycle repairmen up there in Dayton, Ohio, to create the world's first heavier-than-air powered aircraft. And this is what the author of that book, Empire of the Air, says in his closing paragraph. Finally, I counsel the greatest possible prudence to all who undertake to solve the problems of sailing flight. Let them carefully canvass all the causes of accidents which it is possible to foresee. But once they have made this canvass, once they have completed their researches, I recommend them to act with energy and will. And I know of no better word to say to them than the one which I began this monograph, daring wins. So he is saying, hey, carefully consider the risks. Think about what the ramification of those risks are, but then once you've considered it, in order to solve the tough problems, in this case of flight, you need to have a level of confidence and moral fortitude to be the right amount of daring to move your organization forward, to ensure that we are moving our collective organization forward. Because if you don't have any sense of daring or any moral courage, then you're going to stagnate, your organization is going to stagnate, and we're going to fail to live up to the challenges that we face in a very dangerous and complex world. And so daring wins. Point number 7. So this is me in a old-fashioned wig and robe. You probably have already figured out that I'm not necessarily the traditional kind of leader, and I'm okay with that. For good or bad, I'm a little non-traditional. And so my team suggested to me, and I trust the team, hey, let's have a trial of ideas, a public trial of ideas, to decide which ideas we should pursue and whether a fairly radical idea, we had a slate of them at the time, a slate of radical ideas was worth pursuing or not, and would have the whole base show up in the Oak Club. I would dress up with this attire, with a gavel in my hand, and I would referee or adjudicate the two sides of, here's a radical idea, here's maybe an expert that's wedded to the status quo, and let them make their arguments, rebut once, and then decide based on that which path we follow. So I'm sitting up there in my robe, and I'm sitting up there in my wig with my gavel in my hand. I'm like, I probably should have thought about in my own mind, how am I going to decide whether I go with one or the other, right? There's a bit of intuition that comes with being a leader, and maybe I need to use that. But then if someone asks me, hey, how are you going to decide on some of these things? Maybe I need to think through what is my own internal rubric that's a little more strict or a little more prescriptive than this, loosey-goosey judgment call. And so I wrote down while I was sitting up there listening to these very good ideas, or some very bad ideas, my rubric that I was going to use. And here's what I wrote real time, and maybe consider this for your situation in how to consider whether an innovative idea is a good idea or not. What problem are we solving? Or what are the benefits of trying to do something to solve the status quo? Number 2, how does your idea compare to foundational principles? The idea of all right, go back to core values, go back maybe to my boss's mission and vision statement, go back to what I've said our priorities are. How does this compare to that? And use that as a litmus test to see if this is something worth pursuing or not. Number 3, what are my designated experts in the areas impacted? Think about that idea. Doesn't mean, by the way, that someone who's an expert wedded to the status quo is going to win the day, but I at least owe it to them and myself to consider their expert opinion before I start just going off the handle as a leader that knows nothing about that particular topic, say maintenance. They come up with a great maintenance idea, some innovative solution to some problem I didn't know existed, and they share with me what we should do about it. And then someone who's fairly expert in that area says, hey, that's a really bad idea. Or I would be an idiot if I didn't go to Tin Man and ask him, hey, Tin Man, hey, there's this maintenance idea out there. It sounds a little crazy to me. What do you think about it? And then now I can consider an expert opinion in the subject before just me being the yes guy, flying off the handle, just saying yes to ideas without being informed about what's going on. So, what are my designated experts in the area who have to think about the idea? Number 4, related to that, what are the risks of implementing this new idea? Number 5, what authorities are required to make the change? Right? There are times where as a wing commander, I can say yes, 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 wait a second. I don't have the authority to say yes to that. I've got to go ask my boss or his boss. Or I got to change the law, or I got to get more budget authority, or oh, by the way, my budget isn't allocated for something like this, so I can't do it unless I get Congress to say yes. All those things can be done, but I need to know where my limits are as a decision maker, so I don't make a decision that exceeds my authority, unless there's a compelling reason, and there's a compelling reason to accept that risk. But in general, I shouldn't do that. I should at least inform my boss, if not, go through the right channels to make sure the right authority is making the right decision. And then number 6 is there's some middle ground that optimally satisfies stakeholders between the innovation idea and the status quo. Right? Maybe we should do a study. Now that's boring and that's a way to kill ideas. So maybe I should do a trial. Or maybe I should do an experiment. Or maybe I should take a step in the direction of what this innovation suggests I should do, but only a step in that direction and then see what happens. President FDR said this. By the way, in a book that I highly recommend, Leadership in Turbulent Times. It sounds pretty much like a rule book for our day, but the author goes through turbulent times like the Civil War and like World War II and how leaders deal with those turbulent times, and I recommend it to you. Leadership in Turbulent Times. FDR said this: "It is never well to take a drastic action if the results can be achieved with equal efficiency in a less drastic fashion." So now as a leader, I'm weighing hey, this seems radical, this seems boring, and we're not going to actually get anything done and progress. So maybe there's somewhere in between that is less drastic that gets the same result than this radical idea that this airman or guardian has over here. And so we should consider, based on that rubric that I just shared, what we should do and how we should handle situations. All right, next slide. And I realize that we've got about 5 minutes now to be done, and we've got a social 30 minutes to follow till 16:45, and so whatever you got for me after that, I'm sticking around. All right, last idea. This is me in that same wig, but we actually hired a company that did some messaging for us that was a lot more creative than maybe the normal way that public affairs would deal with things, and they created some slogans and some provocative art for us that we would hang around the wing. My favorite slogan they came up with is, "Find out where no lives and kill it," because there's way too many leaders that quickly find ways to get to know instead of ways to get to yes, and so that was my favorite one. This happened to be my Halloween costume for the year, as I gave out candy to the kids that trick-or-treated in our awesome neighborhood there on Palo Verde. On my last commander's call, before I left Edwards there after my wing command there, my wing command at Andrews prior to that, so I went at a commander's call, big base auditorium, 1,000 people or so. You know, normally at those things, people aren't going to raise their hand and ask a question. So they would text in random things to my command chief who was sitting on stage with me, and he would ask me these off-the-wall questions. You know, sometimes they were Marvel or DC or, you know, Cowboys or Redskins or whatever it is, and tell us a dad joke. Sometimes they were a little more serious. And one of the questions was, "Hey, sir, you've been here now for 20 months, leading this innovative culture. What was the best idea that you implemented during your time?" And pretty quickly, I did a scan of the ideas that we'd implemented. There was a lot of waivers, a lot of things we got off of airmen's plates that shouldn't have been on there to begin with. We opened up a wing stop on base. We allowed no have no salute areas in areas that didn't make sense, like the child care centers and youth program centers, just some things like that, shorts for maintainers on the flight line when it's 115 degrees. Things that, we did a lot. But my answer was this: my best idea was listening to all of your ideas. That's it, right? I'm not the idea guy. 10 man, not the idea guy, right? You may not be the idea guy or the idea gal. Right? Maybe you are. I'm not trying to say maybe he's the most creative dude in the room, but you might not. I'm certainly not, right? And so I'm not the one that's going to come up with the great ideas. The best thing that I can do is to consider, in a win like Edwards, 7,500 people, there's probably a lot of good ideas in that win. And I will best implement change in my organization if those 7,500 airmen, by the way, and their families, and they were included in our innovative journey to begin as well, and we had teams of spouses and actually teams of kids that helped us generate and bring to fruition creative, innovative ideas. That is now a population of, say, 15,000 people. So now instead of one trying to come up with good ideas, I'm just there to squint with my ears and to listen to good ideas and to find processes to facilitate those good ideas getting to smart commanders like 10-man or commanders willing to listen like me, and then now act on those ideas. And there was no one idea, no moonshot that I could say put us over the edge and was the most amazing idea we had at Edwards. There were some really good ones, right? We stood up a space test pilot school. General Raymond's been out there since then. We have done some remote testing from St. Louis to Edwards on the T7, never been done before, right? Those were good ideas that came out of airmen, not out of mine. And so your best idea, probably, in creating an innovative culture is listening to those awesome ideas and those awesome airmen or guardians that are around you. By the way, and I'm not going to linger on this because I've got 2 minutes, I want to honor your time, but there's a guy who wrote a book named Thomas Kuhn, Paradigms, the Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and he says that you can't change a paradigm without a crisis. And that's a pretty negative view, right? You've got to go through a crisis in order to change your overarching worldview or paradigm. But there is a loophole in there. And the loophole is listening to new members of the organization. Because they are not trapped by the paradigm. You're going to be a lieutenant. You're going to be the new member of the organization. It's not easy sometimes to be the one that walks into the room and comes up with the good ideas. In fact, if you go into the room with your mouth first, you're quickly going to be discarded as somebody not worth listening to. But if you go in as a team player with creative ideas, not trapped by the paradigm, and you try to collaborate, and you listen to maybe some folks that have been around for a while, you ask pointed questions, and you orient yourself, and maybe you put together a coalition of the willing, then maybe your voice can be heard, and it may be the only thing that prevents the crisis from happening that Tom Kuhn warns is inevitable without a change of paradigm, and a change of paradigm is impossible without a new idea generated by crises or by a young new member of the organization. So figure out how you're going to implement that. I don't recommend going into the room out first, but I do recommend having the courage to think through and ask the questions when you get to a new organization. Hey, I don't quite understand why we do it this way. Can you explain? And you will find out that maybe somebody's willing to listen, and your idea or perspective might be the only one that prevents the crisis. And speaking of crises, there is a geopolitical one that is on the horizon that it is not our responsibility to resolve. We're towards the end of our awesome time in the United States Air Force. It is up to you to solve the challenges of the future for our service, the Air Force, and our service, the Space Force. And if you are complacent and bullheaded like Harry R. Truman, you and the rest of our nation are going to be buried. But if you are willing to employ some of the techniques and the thoughts that I shared with you over the course of the last 45 minutes, then our nation has hope, and our services have hope, and we collectively, primarily you, will lead us into the future in a way that allows us to be even stronger than we were in the past because of the type of culture that you will create in our United States Air Force and our United States Space Force. Thank you for your time today. Tim Mann, back to you.
Thank you, George.
your time. As a token of our gratitude, I'd like to give you our Captain 720 coin.
Cadet Harris, thank you very much. It was an absolute joy. So very quickly for you all, thank you. I've got a daughter who's a ROTC student, freshman at Baylor. She's embarrassed to have me come talk to them. But I can tell her that you guys are cool enough to let me come talk. So if you ever see Summer Teichert, give her a bad time for being embarrassed by her dad. But at least you guys don't know me so that you can't be embarrassed by me exposing it for you. Awesome. I think that means go ahead and grab water and go ahead and grab a chow, y'all.
Come get water.
You can also start questions while you're going through.
Yeah, you can sit down, you can gaggle, I don't care what it is, but please get up there and get some water and get some snacks. Great question. What else? Go ahead.
Good, judges. I just want to ask, what are some of the best ideas that innovations that you want to take to us, that maybe we can kind of carry the torch?
Yeah, you know what? Let me think about that for a bit. That's a great question. So a lot of the ones that we had to turn down were things that rested at a higher level of authority. Actually, I'll tell you the one, and this isn't an idea, but it's an authority, that I pitched our innovative culture to the Vice Chief, then General Wilson, and I asked him, sir, I want you to use our wing as a trial, and all of those things that normally require waivers at much higher level than me, I want you to just delegate all that decision-making authority to me and let me go and prove to you that wing commanders can be trusted even at things that they say 4 stars and above, if there is above, but at the Chief Staff Air Force level. He wasn't quite willing to do that. I was disappointed. I think that would have been an awesome trial. By the way, it was in that meeting where he pointed me to hey, you may have more waiver authority than you think because of this kind of loophole in that regulation of regulations that basically says if you're a wing commander and there isn't a specific waiver authority above the wing commander that's a part of the paragraph, then you can go ahead and waive it. You just have to tell the authority that you did so. And I'm like, all right, fight's on. And we got a lot of waivers through by that. So he kind of got to yes without getting to yes. I don't know if I have a better example than that, but that was the one thing that I really wished that I could have tried out and proven to General Wilson and General Goldfield at the time that wing commanders can be trusted way more than they think, and they should delegate all of that authority down to the local wing commander. No, thank you. Go ahead.
So you talked a little bit earlier about managing your time to kind of maximize the 8 hours of sleep a day.
Yep.
So you can be fresh for the next day.
Yep.
I think we could all benefit from hearing how you kind of learn to do that.
Oh my, okay. No, so I appreciate that. So I was telling the folks I had lunch with that really life is a time management exercise. I will tell you that my priorities in life, and I spelled them out, career is number 5. If you're a wing commander or you're a general officer at the Pentagon, it's probably reasonable that you're spending 50 to 60 hours of work a week, right, to do your job. That's pretty reasonable. So now you're like, wait a second, there's only 160-some hours in a week, but I said that's priority number 5. What am I doing for priorities number 1 through 4? And what I'm doing is that I am, now I'll talk about my moments of reflection here in a bit, but I am very intentionally considering what my priorities are and how I can allocate an appropriate amount of time and maybe more important, energy, attention, and passion to those other priorities that are not career. And then I very carefully consider and reflect on, am I doing a good job? So how did I get to that? I was a mid-level major flying F-22s in a test squadron before it was operationally capable. It's not a bad place to be, but we were actively flying 6 days a week. And I would get to the end as a captain and a senior captain and young major of, say, a week or a month, and I would be burned out, and I would think through so I was extremely busy during this last week or this last month. What did I do that was important? And sometimes I couldn't answer that question. And so I started a process where about every 3 weeks, I was just giving Summer, my awesome daughter who's there at Baylor, an explanation of how I do this. For about every 3 weeks, and I just did it last week, I sit down and I look at my annual priorities and goals. I explicitly spell out my priorities. They don't often change, my big 6 or 7 priorities. Last time they changed was about a decade ago slightly. and then I have goals every year within each of those priorities. And then every 3 weeks, I go back and look at how am I doing against my priorities and annual goals that are within those priorities. And then how am I doing based on the things I said I was going to focus on 3 weeks ago? How did I do during those 3 weeks? And then what goals within my priorities do I want to set for the next 3 weeks? And I go through this process. I do some journaling there too. I've got a blessings journal. I've got a leadership journal. But I am very intentional about setting aside time about every 3 weeks to reflect on what are my priorities and what are things that I want to do very intentionally to further those priorities. I found that by establishing that battle rhythm about the time as a mid-level major, I wish I would have done it before, that now just by the nature of reflecting on priorities and goals, I don't nail it. I never nail it. I always look at the last 3 weeks and say, man, I was pretty close here, I did okay here, I blew it here, what do I need to do to adjust? But by having that process, I am far more capable and able to be aligned with my priorities than I would be otherwise. And so my recommendation is be very intentional about thinking through what are your priorities, what are your goals, and reflect and assess on a fairly regular basis. I do get about 8 hours of sleep a night. I realize that in order for me to operate at the level I want to operate, that I need it. I typically am decaffeinated because I don't need caffeine except towards the end of the week, and then sometimes I need a little bit of help. But in general, I know that if I get good sleep, then I can be full throttle for those 16 hours that I'm awake to service those priorities in the right way and have, hopefully, a life that is more integrated and more fulfilling and aligned with my priorities. Quick segue on that, and I'll open up to the next question. You can sometimes figure out how can you service multiple priorities at once, and that's the best bang for your buck, right? So say you list out your priorities, and say you say family is priority, and country is priority, and career is priority, and say those are distinct priorities. They are for me. Now you're like, all right, so say I'm going to an Airman Leadership School graduation, and I could go as the wing commander, as the host by myself. I could invite my wife, and we have plenty of opportunities for date nights, but maybe I could do that. Or maybe I could invite my 14-year-old son, Noah. And now I'm hanging out with Noah at the head table at ALS graduation, at Andrews or at Edwards, and we're spending time together, and he's getting announced and recognized, and I'm serving my country, and I'm doing something that's necessary for my career. And now I'm not just doing career stuff, but I'm doing career stuff that is also country stuff, that is also family stuff, and I'm able to service those multiple priorities. So I find out that an airman in my wing is struggling for whatever reason, say his father died. And I reach out to him via text, and I check in on him, that's servicing the career. And I tell him I'm going to pray for him, and I pray for him. Now I'm merging my faith priority with my career priority, and I'm not crossing any lines, and I'm now a more integrated whole person than if I just looked at life as stovepipes of priorities. And so really one of the ways is reflection, and one of the ways is finding ways to break down stovepipes of barriers of priorities and integrate your life into a whole, and you'll find that life is more meaningful that way also. Great question, thanks, sir. All right, go ahead.
So today I agree with
And keep grabbing food and water as you guys want. You don't need to be static. Go ahead.
So you talked about being burned out.
Yes.
I think as students, we can understand that feeling a lot.
Or as Americans. Yep.
Yeah. So you said you made adjustments or you reflected. Could you speak more specifically on some of those adjustments you may have made?
Yep.
Or how you reflected and said, okay, this is an area in my life where I could really see improvement, or, asking yourself tough questions of, am I really acting efficiently in these areas of my life?
Nope, so awesome. I appreciate that. So just a couple of quick thoughts. Number one, in my calendar, on my work calendar, I will schedule a go take Noah to tennis practice at 2:30 when he gets out of school, and then I'm gone for the day. By the way, there's plenty of pounds of flesh the Air Force is going to get out of me to get the work done, right? Don't have to worry about that. But now, I've set aside time, my calendar, by putting it on my work calendar, not to show off and demonstrating to the rest of my organization who is surfing my calendar because they do, wait a second, this guy's really busy and he's taking his son to tennis, right? Or he's going out of town to go visit his daughter at Baylor on leave or whatever it may be. And it's on my calendar, so it gets done, because what gets scheduled gets done, and I'm carving out time, and you can do that for all of the priorities in your life. A second thought on that is that we are not machines, all right? We are not robots. We need time to regroup. So that means you need to find ways to get enough sleep. You need to fully take vacation. I have found that a week vacation at a time is probably not enough, because I've got spin down time and spin up time, and now the true downtime is minimal. I typically now schedule 2 weeks of leave every summer to really have a good chunk of time. By the way, when I'm on leave, I'm not checking my work phone. Right? I have delegated authority. They can reach me if they really, really need to. They never have had to really, I say never, there was one time, and that's okay. Things happen, and that's all right. And I quickly engaged and was able to solve whatever that situation was. But you need time off on a regular basis by getting some sleep. You need vacation. And then starting around the same time I did the self-assessment, I decided, largely based on faith, but also for practical reasons, that I'm doing no work on Sundays. Okay? I need time to regroup. And as a busy then SAS student, and then DO, squadron commander, another school, a group commander, a staff job in the Pentagon, wing command, deployed for 14 months to Baghdad, and now on the job here, I haven't really violated that at all. Now my team knows if they need me on a Sunday, call me, text me, I can be fully engaged and I'm in. But as a regular practice, I'm not going to check emails, I'm not going to do that. I need time with my family, I need time to rewind or recharge, I need time to focus on my faith, and those things have helped me be far more productive when I am on than I ever would have been if I tried to slog through another week and another month and another year, and you find yourself very dull when you do that. So be very intentional about scheduling things, because what gets scheduled gets done, and finding time to recharge in a way that absolutely is commensurate with your needs as a human being. Great question, thank you. Go ahead.
Sir, so for us as young lieutenants, and then also for our airmen, how do you recommend working with Navy commanders that aren't on your mindset, and then are like, that's the right, we're sticking to it, I don't want it.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a little example, and I'm going to tell you how this gets back to what you said. During my time in Baghdad, I was the nation's senior defense official and defense attaché. I was our senior military representative in Baghdad working with Iraqis, which means that I engaged with senior Iraqis a lot. There was a guy, if you want to grab a seat by the way, unless you want to stand, do whatever you want, I'm good. With a mustache like that, you earn. So I engaged with Iraqis, and one of the guys that I engaged with every week was their CHOD, Chief of Defense, their chairman, Abdul Amir Urala. It was very well known that the CHOD, Urala, was aligned with the Iranian militia groups, the bad guys in Iraq. Not ISIS bad guys, the different bad guys, probably the more challenging bad guys, which were the Iranian aligned bad guys. And I knew that he was aligned with them. But he was a guy that, based on my position, I needed to find a connection. He would have slit my throat in a moment if given the opportunity, without the proper disincentives. But I understood that there was things that he and I could do together that would be good for him and would be good for me. And so we found ways to connect over some shared experiences against ISIS. That was a common cause that we had together. We had fought together and bled together with Americans fighting ISIS. So that was some common bond. But then he would look good as the chief of their military if their military was more capable. We needed them to be more capable against ISIS. And so now, in the Venn diagrams of his objectives and my objectives, what seemed like non-overlapping objectives actually had a decent amount of overlap. And we were extremely productive together because we found common ground and because we understood that there was some shared objectives. And so, with the boss, that may be a little stuck in his or her ways, you can figure out how to telegraph to them that it would help them, it would be in their best interest to consider this idea. Now, you can be in your face about that and it will fail. Or you can be nuanced about that and help them to understand, maybe with a coalition of the willing, maybe with a compelling success story, maybe with a great narrative, kind of like Shark Tank, right? I don't watch a lot of Shark Tank, but you win over those judges by convincing them that they're going to make some money off of your idea, right? If you can figure out a way to help your boss understand that he or she is going to make money off your idea, and it's going to make him look good or her look good to their boss, then now you've got an inroad where your Venn diagrams overlap. And so finding the right way, based on the context, to help them to understand is in their best interest will then open up the door for things that otherwise that door would be closed. No, great, thank you. And great mustache.
So,
All right, what else?
We have time for about 1 or 2 more questions. If anyone has to leave, this is the end of PMT time, but please stay if you have more questions. We have a little bit more time to go. But 1 or 2 more from the audience, and then we'll be at time.
All right, what do you guys got? Any topic, anything? Go ahead, please.
Sir, kind of awful. You mentioned always pushing for airmen's ideas when they bring their own to strive for innovation. But how do you start that culture on day one when you show up to your job and a fresh second lieutenant? How do you build that trust and feel comfortable bringing you with it?
That is awesome. So you know what? I should have. So I should have woven this into my talk. So on day one, as a leader, I typically bring in my subordinate leaders and share my leadership philosophy with them. It's about 75 minutes. 10 men went through it. It helps them to understand that, to me, leadership is something that we're all aspiring to and we're developing together. I want them to know me by hearing my leadership philosophy, and I want them to maybe take some things back with them about that. As a part of that time, if 10 man remembers, I handed out note cards to all subordinate leaders, and then I went down about a week later to all the squadron commanders, so another echelon down, and did the same thing, handing out note cards. And I asked them, hey, right here, anonymously or not, things that you want me to delegate to you, or good ideas that are easy to implement, where you can get quick wins, or things that are standing in your way that I have the power to help get out of your way. And we compiled those note cards, and very quickly and publicly tried to find some quick wins. And by publicly, I mean we started to publish hey, we got these ideas. Within a week, we did these types of things to the benefit of our wing, or your group, or your squadron. And all these ideas came from your leaders. And so thank you for their boldness to come forth, whether it was anonymous or not. So now, on day one, I'm proving that I'm listening at least to my subordinate leaders and their subordinate leaders. And then as quickly as I could, I stood up something that I call Dragon's Lair. My call sign is Dragon, which was a way via an app to anonymously provide feedback to me or to suggest a good idea to me. No barriers, no filters. They type something in, it's anonymous. I get the output, and then everybody in the wing, or who has that app, sees my response to what they asked. And now, as quickly as I can, I publicize that. And no one knows where these ideas came from. They just know that the wing commander is getting a bunch of anonymous ideas. They see them all, the good and the bad and the ugly. I respond to them all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And now we start finding ways to get to yes on the ones that make sense. And now, from my subordinate leaders and their subordinates, and anonymously for anybody who has that app, no one actually trolled me. I expected that some Yahoo in Beijing would get the app and they would say, hey, roll inverted and stick your F-22 in the ground. I never got trolled. I had some wacky ideas. Some of those wacky ideas we implemented, or implemented a version of the wacky idea because it wasn't so wacky after all. But the world knew, because every time I had the opportunity to talk to a group, I talked about, got this from Dragon's Lair, we got to yes on this, 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 and this. Keep them coming. It's a little bit like the summer of waivers. And so, to me, helping in whatever difficult situation, in whatever non-attributable way makes sense, helping your airmen and guardians know that you are listening. And so providing a venue for you to listen anonymously, and then acting as quickly as you can and as publicly as you can on some of those ideas starts the ball rolling in a way that's helpful for your organization. Great question, thanks.
So from the having to bring my best game every day, it all had to do about the guidance there. My airmen, who are maintainers, they don't like reading. They typically don't like technology. Somehow they knew where that app was. They put stuff on there, and he was consulting me quite frequently. Can we do this? And I was like, where is he getting this?
No, but sometimes it'd be like, no, boss, that's stupid. I got it. How do I respond back to tell them they're stupid without telling them they're stupid, right? By the way, that's a way to shut off the good idea factory pretty quickly. The first time you respond in a way that is stinging to a dumb idea, people are going to stop presenting ideas to you. And so you got to shape the response in a way and be like, you know what? But normally there's a reason, right? They don't know. A young airman doesn't know that this idea can't work. So you explain to them, hey, that's a great idea. Let me tell you why I can't get to yes on that. And then you explain, and now they're smarter for asking the question. And you do that anonymously or not, it doesn't matter, but anonymously is certainly less threatening than if a young airman came up to big bad one-star wing commander with some potentially goofy idea.
And the value of that is that young airman, it's probably not the first time they test drove that idea. The test drove it with the NCO told them you can't do that in the story. But the answer back from the wing commander on the 14 reasons why we can't do that, then they're like, okay. But a lot of times that it's the idea getting to the people that can affect the change. And that's really what I loved about his Dragon's Lair. I was amazed that maintainers actually used it. And I was pedaling every day to keep up.
If only they could have scrawled on the rock walls in hieroglyphs, then it would have been more maintainer friendly. There's some ideas. Oh, the summer waivers related to that. My ROE in my wing was all waivers get directly to me as quickly as possible. You as an intervening supervisor can tell me why I shouldn't, but you can't stop. You can't say no. Only I can say no. And fostering ways anonymously via Dragon's Lair or whatever it may be are helpful towards that end as well. This is a picture of me, but more importantly, it's a picture of the 10-man's hangar with an awesome large American flag at some event that I was there for in Mess Dress that probably Noah or Summer Tiffany or Melanie were there with me. But
Annual award star.
that was a pretty cool hangar. Captain Marvel was filmed in there. We had Samuel L. Jackson and Brie Larson hanging out in there. It was pretty cool. And that was all 10-man. 10-man, I think that's all I've got. But
Any final questions?
all right, last one.
Sir, Cadet Carpenter, you mentioned earlier investing in people. How can we, as second lieutenants, if we see opportunities such as conferences or conventions,
Yep.
how can we implement the process to make that a TDY for airmen and send them off to that sort of training?
Yeah, no, so that's awesome. There's a lot of allowance for that type of stuff. Probably by now, at the wing you go to, or the Delta you go to, there is some innovation organization that you can tap into, right? Maybe they call it a spark cell, maybe they call it, whatever it may be. Tap into them quickly. Become a part of the innovative organization that has been developed there. It might not be very robust, but they're probably the ones with the situational awareness about how you can get resources and the authorities you may have that you don't necessarily know about, and they can help you. But even if all of that doesn't exist, and you don't have any resources, and you can't give your airmen time to go do something, you personally can invest in them. You can create a culture where on day one, you are helping them to understand that you are there in this journey alongside of them to lead and to develop them into the best possible version of themselves. And by your individual time as a leader, whether it's a lieutenant or not, now you are investing in them to help them become the best possible version of themselves. And frankly, a supervisor or a leader that does that in the beginning and on a regular basis will have far more of an impact on an airman or a guardian than if you send them to a fancy school. I think fancy schools are awesome, but I really like leaders who personally invest their time in developing their awesome airmen and guardians. Think about our force. Less than 1% of the American population serves in the United States military. Less than 1%. Those airmen and guardians you have under you are pretty darn special. We talk about the 1%ers, those top 1% in income earners. Got it, people can think what they want about them, but your 1%, the part that you are of that 1% is extremely special. And you owe it to your airmen to help them become the best possible version of themselves. And if you invest that type of time, you're going to make amazing airmen and guardians that thrive into the future. Thank you.
So when you're waiting to go on EAD, if you've got a CAT card, I can send you an AFIS website where you can complete some online training that will help you. Free of charge.
All right, let's give one final round of applause.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.
Stand by.